My name is Marissa, and I had the second part of the chapter, the effective lesson, and where Mallory left off, we were talking about learning probes and asking questions. And an important part of that is knowing how long to wait, and you have to understand wait time. So that's just the amount of time that you wait before you answer the question yourself, after you ask it, and before you move on to another student. So you have to give them enough time to formulate an answer, but not too long. So the book says between 3 and 6 seconds. Calling order is also important, and that's pretty self-explanatory. It's just the order that you call names in whenever you're calling on someone to answer a question. So the book says that volunteers are not the most effective way because it allows some students, if they don't raise their hand, they don't have to participate in the discussion. And the goal was to get everybody to participate. So you should give them time to come up with an answer and then randomly pick, in whatever way you choose, a student to answer it. So some examples of that are flashcards with everybody's name on it and you just pick one, or popsicle sticks. There's a bunch of different ways. Most teachers, though, have like a clipboard with an attendance list, and they just check off after a student answers a question. That way you can keep track of who answered and who didn't, so that you give everyone a fair opportunity to answer. All pupil response. That's the best way whenever you have a question that's yes or no, or something that's not subjective, whenever there's only one correct answer. So that's when the teacher asks a question and everybody answers, usually at the same time. If it's out loud, that's a choral response. And it gives the teacher an idea of what the whole class knows, and it allows everybody an opportunity to answer questions when it's combined with just picking a student. So you have to have a combination of both. And there are some questioning strategies to avoid. So you shouldn't ask leading questions, and leading questions are just questions that have the answer in it or that persuade students to think a certain way. So you wouldn't want to say, you wouldn't cross the road without looking, would you? Because that's a leading question, because you're telling the student, not directly, but you're telling them what you want them to think. Okay, so number 2, that kind of goes with calling order. You don't want to call on the same students all the time. You have to give everybody a fair opportunity to answer. Even if there's one student that knows all of the answers to the questions, if you call on somebody who maybe doesn't know, they still have that opportunity. And it's important for the students to answer questions to show that they're participating and that they're absorbing the information. Number 3, don't ask questions that are all the same. So like asking all simple yes or no questions, or asking all open-ended, or even asking all difficult questions. You want to have a variety because you want students to understand concepts in a wide range of different contexts. Number 4, don't engage one student at length while the others have nothing to do. So that's like if you call on a student and you're just feeding off of each other and you start a discussion with them, but the rest of the class is left out from it. That doesn't benefit the whole class. So number 5, you should always correct wrong answers. It's important to give students feedback. Excuse me. Number 6, ignoring answers. Again, you have to give students feedback. They need to know if they were on the right track so that they can make sure they're learning the right things. Number 7, that kind of goes with number 3, too many yes or no questions. You want to have a variety. You want to ask questions that are factual, like terminologies, or like clothes, and you want to have a variety of questions. So you can have subjective or objective questions that really depend on the student's opinions of a subject, or just factual, like what is 2 plus 2, or why is it, you want to have a variety. And number 8, always make sure that your questions are clear and concise. You want to use as simple wording as possible to avoid confusion. So independent practice, like Mallory said, could be homework, quizzes. It's anything that the student does on their own to practice the skills that they just learned in the lesson. So an example, the teacher teaches a lesson on addition, and then the students practice addition problems at their seat with different worksheets. And that would be called seat work. So seat work is the in-class independent practice as opposed to homework, which you do at home. But seat work is often not effective because whenever you're practicing by yourself, some students get confused and they give up on one question if the teacher isn't monitoring the work. So teachers should spend more time lecturing and explaining the information than just giving them a brief overview and throwing them into it. You want to have good guidance skills for that. Another thing, whenever you're asking questions, I'll go back. Okay, there's a little acronym, and I put a link with the presentation on the Moodle page, and it's SPREAD. So that's what you want to remember when asking questions. So the S stands for seek out evidence. You want students to be able to explain why their answer is their answer, why they chose that, which is a big part of Common Core now. Predict. So some questions you could ask them to make predictions about what they think is going to happen next, and so on. R is relate concepts. So you want to tie in maybe something that you learned in a previous lesson to what you're teaching now. The E is for explain. So you want them to elaborate on why their answer is the correct answer, not just giving an answer. And D is describe, which is pretty self-explanatory. So there are some guidelines for independent practice. 1, don't assign the independent practice until you're sure that students can do it. So like I said, don't just teach the lesson and expect them to automatically get all the answers right on their independent practice. You have to guide them and monitor their work and go over the lesson in maybe a couple different ways so that other people can understand it depending on their learning style. So number 2, keep the assignments short. You want to have a larger amount of lecture time and teaching than you do seat work and independent practice. Number 3, give clear instructions. Whenever you're starting the independent practice with them, you can get them started and you read the instructions or the directions and make sure that everybody understands it, and then guide them to start the problems. And you want to avoid interruptions also. Monitoring their work is important because if they have any questions, you're right there and they can ask you. They won't get stuck or hung up on a question and get discouraged. And number 6, collect their work and include it as a grade. And then, of course, provide feedback because they need to know if they were right or wrong so that they can improve their performance for maybe the test or other assessments. So assessments and feedback. There are many different kinds of assessments, but there's tests, quizzes. You can use the independent practice or the seat work as a test or as an assessment. And it tells the teacher how effective the lesson was. So based on their grades on the test, the teacher will know if she was teaching at the right pace or if all of the students grasped the information. She'll know that based on their grades. and it allows students to retain what they learn. So the more that the information is presented to them and the more they're tested on it, the higher their grades will be, because they're being constantly enforcing this information, and they're going to commit it to long-term memory instead of just working memory. So it's important to provide feedback for students because it allows them to improve their performance. Excuse me. If you have like an essay or something and you give it back to them right away, they'll know what not to do for the next essay because they saw the marks that you made. So it's going to improve their performance. And it's also important for teachers because it'll tell you if you're going too fast in the lesson because maybe not everybody caught it, or maybe when you're doing the independent practice or the quizzes, maybe everybody did get it, and then you can speed up the lesson a little bit. Or if you need to reteach it to some students because some students did poorly and others did highly, or if you need to reteach it to the whole class because there was just a general lack of understanding. And like I said, give extra help to students that need it. You'll be able to tell that based on the feedback of the assessments. So providing practice and review. A lot of teachers review for tests. It's important to review important information that you might have learned in the past in order to retain it. The more you work on it, the more you practice and review the information, the better it'll stick with you. And homework is a good way to do that because it allows the students to practice and it allows the teacher to see how much her students know or his students know. And it increases the level of achievement.